Close your eyes right now and take a look. It's not total darkness, is it? There's something there. Maybe a soft glow right in the center of your field of vision. Maybe small pinpoints of light, gently pulsing. Maybe shapes that drift, dissolve, and appear and vanish before you can ever quite focus on them. And the question nobody has ever seriously asked you is, what is that? The answer the world gave you was way too simple. They said it's just your brain processing leftover visual information. They said it's neurons firing randomly. They said it's physiology. They said it's normal. So you accepted it. Because it was the easy explanation. Because questioning it felt crazy. Because nobody around you seemed to care about what exists in that space between open and closed eyes. But what if everything you were told was the exact opposite of the truth? There's something Jesus said, recorded in the Gospels, that most people have read without really getting it. A statement that, once you start connecting it to the phenomenon of the lights you see when you close your eyes, completely changes the way you see your own soul. It's not metaphor. It's not poetic interpretation. It's literal. And it's unsettling in a way that's going to make you rethink every time you dismiss this experience in your own life. This isn't just another spiritual curiosity video. It's not a roundup of New Age theories about auras and chakras. What you're going to see here goes straight to the point, using the actual words of Christ, the latest neuroscience, and accounts of experiences that repeat themselves across cultures separated by millennia and oceans. Every single one of those sources points in the same direction, and that direction is you. Because the lights you see aren't outside of you, they're manifesting from within. And what they're trying to show you is something your soul has been carrying far longer than you can remember. Think about this for a second. Have you ever had that moment, right before falling asleep, where a light flashed so intensely it made you open your eyes to check if someone had turned something on? Or woken up in the middle of the night with a brightness in your field of vision that had no source? Or simply in a moment of prayer, meditation, or deep silence, notice that the darkness behind your eyelids wasn't really dark at all. Those moments are not coincidences. They are not the product of a tired brain, and they are definitely not something you should be ignoring. By the end of this video, you're going to understand what Jesus meant when he talked about the light that's inside you. You'll understand why different spiritual traditions around the world describe this same phenomenon with nearly identical details. You'll understand what neuroscience found when it decided to seriously study this subject and why the conclusions were so uncomfortable that they barely made it to the general public. And most importantly, you'll understand what your soul is trying to show you right now, in this moment of your life, through those lights you see when you close your eyes. But before we get there, I need you to know something. What's going to be revealed here is not comfortable for people who prefer to stay on the surface. This is for those who are willing to go deep. It's for those who feel like there's something more, something bigger, something pulsing underneath everything you see with your eyes open. If that's you, then what comes next was made exactly for you. And the first detail, the one that changes everything, the one that connects physiology to the sacred in a way that no popular theology book has ever shown you, that detail starts right now. You're here because somewhere deep inside you, you already knew this wasn't a coincidence. And you were right. This video exists because thousands of people around the world report the same experience. They describe the same lights, the same shapes, the same feeling that something is trying to communicate, and nobody has ever actually stopped to connect the dots. Today, we're going to do that together. The topic we're going to dig into here is the inner light that appears when you close your eyes, what Jesus specifically said about it, what science discovered and hesitated to publish, and what all of it means for the spiritual journey of someone living right now, in this particular moment in history. If you've ever closed your eyes and seen something that shouldn't be there, this video is for you. If you've ever felt touched by something you can't quite name, this video is for you. If you genuinely want to understand what your soul is trying to show you, then stay here, because we're just getting started. If this kind of content resonates with you, go ahead and hit like right now. It seems simple, but it makes a huge difference in helping more people find this video. Subscribe to the channel too, because what's coming in the next videos is directly connected to what we're going to open up today. And drop the word LIGT in the comments below. That's it. If you've seen lights when you close your eyes and feel like there's something beyond the standard scientific explanation, comment LIGT. I want to know how many of you are on this journey with me. If what you're hearing right now has already shifted something inside you, just imagine what's in the digital book I left in the first pinned comment. It's not a summary of what you'll see here. It's what doesn't fit in a video. Go check it out now. It could come down at any time. Now let's go back to the very beginning. Because to understand what Jesus said about the light inside you and what it means to see those lights when you close your eyes, we need to go way back. We need to go back to the moment when humanity first started recording this phenomenon, and what the world's most ancient civilizations believed about it. The oldest records we have of the experience of seeing light with eyes closed come from ancient Egypt, roughly 3,000 years before Christ. The priests of the Temple of Karnak described, in their initiation papyri, a phenomenon they called the opening of the inner eye. It wasn't metaphor. It was a literal, physical experience described with precision. The initiate would close their eyes in a darkened chamber, enter a state of deep stillness, and begin to perceive luminous shapes moving through their visual field, golden dots, spirals of light, currents that pulsed as though they had their own heartbeat. The priests didn't say this was imagination. They said it was the moment when the Ka, the immortal part of the human being, began to manifest through the physical senses. What's extraordinary about this record isn't the spiritual content itself, it's the consistency. Because the exact same description, with minimal variation, appears in the Vedic texts of ancient India, written independently, thousands of miles away. In the Rig Veda, which is between 3,000 and 5,000 years old, there are passages describing yogis in a state of dhyana, deep meditation, perceiving a light that came from no external source. This light was called Jyoti, the light of pure consciousness. And the texts say, explicitly, that this light was not produced by the mind, it was revealed by it. As if the mind were a veil that, when still enough, allowed the radiance of what lies behind it to shine through. Now think about what that represents. Two peoples completely isolated from one another, developing distinct cultures, distinct languages, distinct religious systems, and both describing the same visual phenomenon with the same level of detail and the same fundamental interpretation. There is a light inside the human being, and it manifests when the human being stops looking outward. But the coincidences don't stop there. In the 5th century before Christ, the Greek philosopher Plato described something in his most famous text, the Republic, that is generally taught in universities as philosophical metaphor. The allegory of the cave, men trapped, seeing only shadows on the walls, mistaking the shadows for reality. The true light existing outside. But there's a detail professors rarely mention. Plato was an initiate of the Eleusinian mysteries, and those mysteries involved practices for inducing altered states of consciousness where participants reported seeing intense light with their eyes closed. The allegory of the cave was not merely abstract philosophy. It was based on direct experience. And then we come to Jesus, and this is where everything converges in a way that should make everybody stop and pay attention. In the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 6, verse 22, Jesus says something that has been read superficially for centuries. He says, "The lamp of the body is the eye. If your eye is good, your whole body will be full of light." People have read that as moral guidance, as a metaphor for having good intentions, for seeing the world positively. But in the context of what Jesus was actually teaching, and in the context of the entire spiritual tradition that preceded him, that statement carries a completely different weight. Jesus wasn't talking about physical eyes. He was talking about the organ of spiritual perception. And when he says the body will be full of light, he's describing a concrete experience, something that happens, something that is perceived, an inner luminosity that comes from no external source, but floods perception when the internal organ of sight is functioning the way it's supposed to. Think about what that implies. If Jesus is describing a real experience of inner light, and if that description lines up with what the Egyptian priests described, what the Indian yogis described, what the Greek initiates described, then the lights you see when you close your eyes are not just neurons firing. They may be the first sign that something Jesus considered central to spiritual life is actually happening inside you. Neuroscience started taking this phenomenon seriously back in the 70s, when researchers at the Stanford Research Institute decided to study what happens in the brain during states of deep meditation. What they found was surprising. The areas of the visual cortex, which normally process images coming through the eyes, were actively stimulated even with the eyes completely closed and in the absence of any light source. The brain was generating visual experiences with zero external input. And those experiences had very specific characteristics. Golden and bluish hues, symmetrical geometric shapes, pulsing patterns that followed a rhythm close to the heartbeat. Researcher Eugene de Queally of the University of Pennsylvania spent decades studying what he called mystical experiences and their neurological basis. He documented that in states of deep mental stillness, the parietal lobe, responsible for perceiving the boundaries of the self, begins to reduce its activity. And when that happens, something interesting occurs in the internal visual field. People describe not just light, but a sense that the light is them, that the boundary between the observer and the observed disappears. That is exactly what Christian mysticism describes. It is exactly what the texts of Jewish mysticism, the Kabbalah, describe when they speak of the light of Ein Sof. It is exactly what Buddhists describe as Rigpa, pure awareness. And it is exactly what you may be experiencing when you see those lights when you close your eyes, even without knowing the name for what's happening. If this message has strengthened your faith, brought peace to your heart, or helped you in any way, know that you can also help us keep going. Producing these messages takes time, dedication, and a lot of work to bring words of hope to more and more people. If you feel called to support this mission, I left a link in the first pinned comment. Any contribution, regardless of the amount, helps us continue this work and reach lives around the world. May God multiply twofold everything you sow in love. And what makes this even more fascinating is what happens when you start paying attention to these lights instead of ignoring them. Researchers working with advanced meditators have documented that people who learn to consciously observe internal light phenomena without trying to control them, without rushing to interpret them, start reporting profound shifts in the way they perceive the external world. More clarity, a stronger sense of presence, a greater capacity to feel connected to other people. As if training your perception to notice the inner light is simultaneously training you to perceive external reality more deeply. This is not a coincidence. It's exactly what Jesus described when he said a good eye would fill the whole body with light. Internal perception and external perception are aspects of the same system. Cultivate one, and the other flourishes. And that brings us to a question most people never allow themselves to ask. If seeing light when you close your eyes is a phenomenon documented by civilizations for millennia, described in the teachings of Jesus, investigated by modern neuroscience, and reported by people in virtually every culture on Earth, why has nobody taught us this? Why is there no space in formal education to discuss what it means to have an inner luminous life? Why has this knowledge stayed locked inside esoteric texts, contemplative traditions, and initiatory groups, out of reach of someone who simply wanted to understand what they see when they close their eyes at night? That question has an answer, and it's going to change the way you understand everything we call spirituality. Some people watch, enjoy, and move on. Some people want to go deeper. If you're the second type, the digital book is in the first pinned comment. Click it now. But before we get to the answer about why this knowledge was hidden, we need to talk about what your soul specifically is trying to show you when you see those lights. Because it's not the same thing for everyone. The color matters. The pattern matters. The moment they appear matters. And when you begin to understand the language of these luminous manifestations, you start to understand messages you've been carrying inside you for years without being able to decode them. There's a fascinating study conducted by neuroscientist Olaf Blank of the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Lausanne, which started out investigating something completely different, out-of-body experiences, and ended up landing in territory that connects directly to our topic. Blank discovered that when the temporoparietal cortex, the region of the brain that integrates information from different senses, is stimulated in a specific way, people experience intense light, a sense of presence, and a perception of their own body from a different angle. But what's most intriguing about Blanky's results isn't the fact itself. It's that these lab-induced experiences are described by participants using the same words people use to describe spontaneous spiritual experiences: presence, light, a sense of something greater. What does that tell us? That the brain has the capacity to perceive dimensions of reality that normally stay outside the reach of everyday consciousness. And that certain states, whether induced by electrical stimulation, deep meditation, contemplative prayer, or simply the silence of closing your eyes before sleep, can open access to those dimensions. The Christian tradition always knew this. Medieval Christian mystics, like Meister Eckhart, Julian of Norwich, and John of the Cross, described with surgical precision their experiences of inner light. John of the Cross, in his text The Ascent of Mount Carmel, describes a spiritual process in which the soul passes through different qualities of inner light, each one corresponding to a deeper level of integration with the divine. It isn't poetry, it's a map. It's a functional description of a process that happens inside those who dedicate themselves to the contemplative life. And what's extraordinary is that John of the Cross never read the texts of the Indian yogis, never had access to the Egyptian papyri, and yet the process he describes aligns with what those other traditions documented independently, as if they were all describing the same territory from different starting points, using different languages, but arriving at the same coordinates. This has a name in contemporary philosophy. It's called perennial philosophy, the concept that there is a core of spiritual experience that transcends cultures and traditions. And the lights you see when you close your eyes are one of the most consistent expressions of that core. Now think about your own experience, not as scientific data, as personal experience. Have you ever closed your eyes in a moment of deep emotion, whether joy or pain, and noticed a different kind of luminosity? Have you ever had that moment in prayer or silence where the darkness behind your eyelids suddenly got less dark? Have you ever woken up in the middle of a luminous dream with the feeling that it was more real than the room where you were lying? If the answer to any of those questions is yes, then what you experienced was not an accident. It was a signal. And understanding where that signal is pointing is exactly what we need to dig into now, because the answer connects Jesus, neuroscience, mysticism, and your life in a way that's going to make everything click differently. But before we get there, I need to ask you something directly. Have you ever felt like there's a dimension of your spiritual life that nobody has ever helped you understand, that you carry inner experiences that are real, that are meaningful, but that don't fit into any normal conversation? That when you try to talk about what you feel in moments of silence, people either change the subject or give you an explanation that completely hollows out what you actually lived? If yes, write the word flame in the comments below. Just that. Flame. Because the people who comment that word here are the people who are awake to what we're exploring in this video, and I want to know how many of you there are. And while you're typing, start thinking about what's coming next, because the next part of this video is going to reveal why this knowledge about inner light was systematically removed from mainstream Christian teaching, who made that decision, when it happened, and what was lost when it did. Because understanding that history of suppression is essential to understanding why you've gotten this far without ever having had this conversation before. In the year 325 AD, something happened in a small city in Anatolia, in modern-day Turkey, that permanently changed the way Christianity would be taught to the world. The Council of Nicaea, convened by Emperor Constantine, gathered bishops from across the Roman Empire with the stated goal of unifying Christian doctrine. What came out of that council was a creed, a theological framework, a hierarchy of authority. What did not come out, what was deliberately left behind, was an entire body of teachings about the direct experience of God, about inner light, about what happens when a human being turns inward and finds what Jesus called the kingdom of heaven within you. That was not an oversight, it was a choice. And understanding that choice is understanding why you got to this video without ever having had this conversation before. Before Nicaea, Christianity was diverse in a way that's hard to imagine today. There were communities that practiced silent contemplation as the center of spiritual life. Communities where Jesus' teachings about the inner light, about the eye that fills the whole body with light, were practiced technique, not just metaphor. Historian Elaine Pagels of Princeton University spent decades documenting what she calls Gnostic Christianity, a strand of early Christian thought that placed direct, interior experience at the center of faith. The texts discovered at Nag Hammadi, in Egypt, in 1945, revealed a Jesus who speaks of inner light with a technical precision that the canonical Gospels only hint at. In the Gospel of Thomas, which didn't make it into the official biblical canon, Jesus says, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you." That statement is not about morality, it's about perception. It's about what happens when you ignore your inner luminous dimension versus when you cultivate it and bring it into consciousness. Pagels documents that these texts were not unanimously considered heretical by the earliest Christians. They were read, debated, practiced. The decision to exclude them was made by an ecclesiastical authority that needed uniformity in order to govern an empire. The diversity of spiritual experience is incompatible with centralized power structures. So what was incompatible was eliminated. And what was eliminated along with those texts was exactly what matters most to our conversation today. The detailed map of how to cultivate the perception of inner light, how to interpret what you see when your eyes close, how to understand that these luminous manifestations are the language of the soul, not neural noise. Researcher and theologian Matthew Fox, who was a Dominican for 21 years before being expelled from the order under pressure from the Vatican, spent decades recovering what he calls the suppressed Christian mystical tradition. In his studies, Fox documents that at least 13 distinct Christian contemplative traditions, from the Desert Fathers of the 4th century to the Rhineland mystics of the 14th, all describe the same process. The silencing of the outer mind opens access to a perception of light that is not produced by the physical senses. And all of these traditions converge on one central point. This light is not produced by the practitioner, it is revealed, as if it had always been there, waiting for the noise to stop so it could be perceived. Modern neuroscience, arriving by the opposite path, has found data compatible with that description. Andrew Newberg, neuroscientist at Thomas Jefferson University, developed the field he calls neurotheology, the study of the neurological basis of spiritual experiences. Using positron emission tomography, Newberg documented that during states of deep contemplative prayer or advanced meditation, the frontal lobe, associated with analytical thinking and planning, shows increased activity, while the posterior parietal lobe, associated with the perception of self-boundaries, shows dramatic reduction in activity. And it is precisely during those states that participants report seeing light. What Newberg found was that this light is not a hallucination in the clinical sense. It is the perception of something that the brain normally filters out, as if the contemplative state removes a filter that exists to keep us functioning in the everyday world, and without that filter, something that was always present becomes perceptible. Think about the implications of that. If there is something that is always present but that we normally filter out, and if that something manifests as light when the filter is removed, then the question isn't whether you will see the light. The question is when you're going to stop filtering it. And that question has everything to do with what Jesus said about the inner eye, what the Christian mystics described as infused contemplation, and what you experience in the quietest moments of your life. If this reached you, it wasn't by accident. Ignoring it is a choice, and every choice has consequences. The digital book is in the first pinned comment. Go check it out now. Tomorrow it might not be there. Every video here is created with dedication to bring hope, spiritual direction, and biblical teaching to those who need it. If you believe in this mission, make a donation of any amount. Your support keeps this channel going and allows more lives to be reached. Link in the pinned comment. Now we need to talk about what was hidden with far more deliberate intent than a single church council, because the erasure of knowledge about inner light didn't just happen inside Christianity. It happened in a coordinated way, across centuries, in virtually every major spiritual tradition of the Western world. And when you see the full pattern, it gets really hard to keep believing it was a coincidence. In medieval Europe, women who reported luminous visions were frequently tried by the Inquisition. Not all of them, but those who lacked institutional protection. Hildegard of Bingen, who described in extraordinary detail the lights she saw in her contemplative states, survived because she had the backing of Bernard of Clairvaux and later Pope Eugene III. But she herself documented that other women with experiences similar to her own were accused of witchcraft. The difference between saint and witch in medieval Europe was often the difference between having institutional protection and not having it. The pattern is clear. When the experience of inner light remained under the control of the ecclesiastical hierarchy, when it was mediated by a confessor, authorized by a superior, it was legitimate spirituality. When it was reported directly, personally, without intermediary, when someone simply said, "I close my eyes and I see light and I feel the presence of God and I don't need any priest to validate that," it was suspect. It was dangerous. It was potentially heretical. Why? Because the direct experience of God doesn't need a middleman, and power structures that are built on mediation don't survive direct experience. This is not conspiracy theory. It's documented history. Historian Richard Smoley, a specialist in esoteric spiritual traditions, traced how contemplative knowledge was systematically moved to the margins of Western culture over the course of 500 years. From the Protestant Reformation, which in many of its expressions rejected the mystical tradition in favor of doctrine, to the Enlightenment, which replaced spiritual experience with scientific reason, there was a progressive narrowing of the cultural space available for taking the inner luminous experience seriously. And the result is visible today. Most people who see lights when they close their eyes have no context for understanding what's happening, no contemplative teacher to guide them, no living tradition that teaches the language of these experiences. At best, they have a neurological explanation that says it's physiological and normal, and at worst, an experience they carry alone, with no name, no map, no community. But there is one piece of data that the guardians of this hidden knowledge never managed to fully erase. A piece of data that resurfaces in every generation, in every culture, in every tradition, like water finding a crack in any obstacle. And it's simple. The experience of inner light transforms those who experience it. Not in a small way. In a fundamental way. People who cultivate the perception of inner light, who learn to relate to what appears when they close their eyes with intention and attention, report changes ranging from reduced anxiety and depression to a complete shift in values, priorities, and the way they relate to the world and to other people. Researcher Lisa Miller of Columbia University published a landmark longitudinal study in 2021 showing that adolescents who had significant spiritual experiences, including experiences of light and presence during prayer or meditation, had dramatically lower rates of depression, substance abuse, and risk behavior as adults. And more, they had greater capacity for compassion, resilience, and finding meaning even in difficult circumstances. What was suppressed wasn't just a set of religious practices. It was human development technology. It was knowledge about how to cultivate the deepest dimension of what it means to be a conscious person, and the suppression of that knowledge left entire generations without access to a resource that was available inside them the whole time. This digital book wasn't made for everyone. It was made for those who are ready to face the truth. Available for a limited time in the first pinned comment. If you hesitate, you might lose access. Now we've arrived at the point where everything converges, where history, science, theology, and personal experience meet in a single understanding that has the power to change the way you live every single day. Because if the light you see when you close your eyes is real, if it has meaning, if it's the language of your soul, then the most important question is not intellectual. It's practical. What do you do with it? But before answering that question, we need to talk about what different spiritual traditions teach about how to relate to the inner light. Because not just any relationship transforms you. It's a specific relationship, cultivated in a specific way, that produces the results mystics of every era have described. Tibetan Buddhism has an entire tradition dedicated to what it calls light practices. In Dzogchen, the most advanced meditation tradition in Tibet, there is a set of practices called Tugul, which literally means leaping over. The practitioner learns to work with the luminous visions that arise in states of deep meditation, not as a product of the mind, but as a direct manifestation of the nature of consciousness. Lama Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche, in his book Awakening the Sacred Body, describes how Togul begins with the perception of points of light with eyes half open or closed, and progressively reveals dimensions of reality that ordinary perception cannot reach. What is extraordinary is that the progression described in Togul, from a point of light to a luminous field to a formless state, is structurally identical to the progression described by medieval Christian mystics in infused contemplation, identical to the stages described in Kabbalistic texts about the ascent through the Sephirot, identical to what Sufis call Kashf, opening, the moment when inner perception expands beyond the boundaries of the ordinary self. We're talking about traditions that never had contact with one another, describing the same map with the same waypoints. And at the center of all of them is the same starting point. The light that appears when you close your eyes and pay real attention. Neuroscience has a name for the state that facilitates these experiences. It's called theta wave state, a brain frequency of 4 to 8 Hz that occurs naturally at the threshold between waking and sleep, and that can be cultivated through contemplative practices. During the theta state, the prefrontal cortex, the center of critical thinking and judgment, reduces its activity. And simultaneously, deeper brain structures, the limbic system, the hippocampus, regions associated with memory, emotion, and the integration of experience, become highly active. It's the state where genuine insight is most likely, where deep memories surface, where the perception of inner light is most intense. Dr. Joe Dispenza, who has spent decades investigating the neuroscience of personal transformation, documented that people who practice contemplative meditation consistently show structural changes in the brain after just 8 weeks. The prefrontal cortex increases in gray matter density. The amygdala, the fear processing center, decreases in reactivity. And most relevant to our conversation, integration between the two hemispheres increases, which Dispenza links to experiences of coherence and wholeness. Exactly what spiritual traditions describe as the result of cultivating inner light. All of this points to a truth that Jesus expressed with striking simplicity 2,000 years ago. The kingdom of God is within you, not as a religious metaphor, as a literal description of a state of consciousness that is accessible, that is real, that produces measurable transformation, and that begins with something as simple as closing your eyes and paying attention to what's there. If you're not subscribed to this channel yet, now is the moment. Hit the button below right now, because what's coming in the next videos will go deeper into every theme we touched on here in a way you won't want to miss. And I'll ask you directly, have you ever had the experience of feeling like the light that appears when you close your eyes has something to tell you? That it's not random, not just physiological, that it carries a meaning you haven't been able to fully decode? Comment why yes or no below. I want to know how many of you are awake to this dimension of human experience. And while you're commenting, start preparing your perception for what comes next. Because now we're going to talk about how all of this translates into lived daily experience, and what you can start doing today so that your soul doesn't have to keep screaming through those lights just to be heard. I want you to stop for a moment. Not mentally. For real. Put down whatever else you're doing if you are doing something else. Just be here with this video, with what we've been building together since the beginning. Because now we've reached the part of this that I most wanted to reach. Not because it's the most impressive in terms of data or citations, but because it's the most true in terms of human experience. Think about your life over the last 6 months, not what happened on the outside, what happened on the inside. Were there moments where you felt disconnected from yourself in a way you couldn't explain? Where the things that were supposed to make you happy just didn't have the same effect anymore? Where you'd wake up in the morning with this feeling that something was missing, but you couldn't name what? That feeling has a name in contemplative traditions. The Sufis call it Ghurba, exile. The separation of the soul from its center. The state of living on the periphery of yourself while your center remains forgotten. And what's remarkable is that virtually every spiritual tradition in the world identifies this state of inner exile not as an exception, not as an illness, but as the default human condition. The starting point of the journey. John of the Cross called it the dark night of the soul, not because God abandons, but because ordinary perception doesn't reach the dimension where God dwells. It's like trying to see the stars in the middle of the day. The stars are there. The problem is the light that's preventing you from seeing them. And this is where the lights you see when you close your eyes become more than an interesting spiritual phenomenon. They become diagnosis, map, compass. Because when these lights appear with greater intensity in your life, it's almost always happening during a moment of transition, of rupture, of deep questioning. It isn't coincidence. It's your internal system, your soul, using the only channel that's still open when everything else is closed, your inner visual perception, to tell you, I'm here. I haven't gone anywhere. I'm still present. Researcher Tanya Luhrmann of Stanford University spent years studying how people in different cultures perceive and interpret the presence of God. What she discovered, published in her book When God Talks Back, is that the capacity to perceive spiritual presence isn't a matter of intellectual belief. It's a matter of trained attention. People who develop the habit of noticing what happens in their inner world, of giving attention to the images, sensations, and lights that arise in states of stillness, progressively develop a richer and more stable perception of divine presence. That has enormous practical implications. It means seeing the lights isn't the destination, it's the invitation. It's the soul saying the channel is open. What you do with the invitation is what determines what happens next. Think about the story of Moses and the burning bush. In the biblical text, the bush had been burning for an indeterminate amount of time before Moses approached. The text says explicitly, Moses turned aside to look. What got Moses' attention wasn't the bush. It was the fact that it was burning without being consumed, the permanence of the phenomenon. And the divine response came precisely when Moses turned aside to look, when he gave his attention to what was out of the ordinary, to what was luminous in the middle of the mundane. Most of us go through life as Moses before the turning. We catch a glimmer at the edge of our visual field, we notice something's there, and we keep walking. Because we have sheep to tend. Because we have commitments, because the world pulled our attention back before we could turn aside. The question this entire video has been building toward is simple. What if you turned aside? What if, the next time you close your eyes and notice that light, instead of ignoring it or immediately opening your eyes again, you stayed for just a moment? Not with expectation, not with an agenda, just with attention. Because what the traditions describe, what neuroscience is beginning to confirm, and what thousands of people report when they start cultivating this attention intentionally, is that the inner light is not static. It responds. It deepens when given attention. It expands when it's not forced. And progressively it begins to reveal dimensions of your own inner nature that you didn't know were there. Carl Jung called this individuation, the process by which a human being becomes whole, integrating the dimensions of the psyche that were fragmented or forgotten. And Jung, who was not a mystic in the conventional sense, wrote extensively about the symbolism of inner light as an archetypal image of the self's totality, the light at the center of the mandala, the luminous point that appears in dreams during the greatest moments of transformation. What you're experiencing when you see light when you close your eyes may be the beginning of an individuation process, of becoming whole in a way you never have been, of integrating parts of yourself that have been in the dark for years, because no one ever taught you it was possible to go there with attention and bring them back into the light. What you're hearing right now is not common information. It's a truth that few have the courage to seek. The digital book is in the first pinned comment. Click it now. It could be gone at any moment. So what do you do with all of this? How does everything we've explored, from history to mysticism to neuroscience to biblical symbolism, translate into something you can actually do today, tomorrow, next week? Because knowledge that doesn't become practice just becomes intellectual curiosity. And intellectual curiosity doesn't transform a life. The first step is the simplest and the hardest at the same time. You need to create space. The inner light doesn't disappear when you're busy. It just becomes inaudible in all the noise. And the noise of modern life, the notifications, the demands, the worries, is calibrated in a way that keeps attention permanently on the surface. Creating space means deliberately pulling your attention away from the surface, even if just for 5 minutes. 5 minutes. Every day. Eyes closed. No phone. No music. No trying to solve anything. Just you, the darkness behind your eyelids, and whatever shows up there. Researcher Sara Lazar of Harvard published a study in 2005 that became well known in the field of contemplative neuroscience. She compared the cerebral cortex of long-term meditators with non-meditators and found significant structural differences in regions associated with attention, introspection, and sensory processing. But the most relevant finding for someone just starting out is something Lazar documented later. Measurable differences begin to appear after just 8 weeks of practice at 27 minutes a day. Not months. Not years. 8 weeks. The second step is learning to observe without immediately interpreting. The natural tendency when you start seeing light when you close your eyes is to immediately ask what it means. And that question, though it's legitimate, when asked too soon, interrupts the process. It's like asking a seed what it's going to become before it germinates. Let it germinate first. Pure observation, simply noticing what's happening without rushing to categorize or explain, is itself a profound spiritual practice. Zen Buddhists call it Shoshin Pyeladli, beginner's mind, seeing what's there as if for the very first time, without the filter of expectations, judgments, or ready-made interpretations. The third step is keeping a record. It doesn't need to be elaborate. A notebook where you write after each session of stillness what you noticed, the color of the light if there was color, the pattern if there was a pattern, the feeling that accompanied it if there was a feeling. Over time, you start noticing correlations. The sessions of greatest luminosity tend to happen at certain moments in life, in certain emotional states, after certain kinds of days. The personal map you build is more accurate than any external system because it's a map of your own interior territory. Dr. Herbert Benson of Harvard, who coined the term relaxation response in the 70s, documented that regular contemplative practices produce measurable changes in more than 300 genes. Genes associated with inflammation, oxidative stress, and energy metabolism. The practice of inner silence isn't just spiritually significant, it's biologically transformative. The fourth step, which most people never take, because it seems too simple, is bringing the light you perceive on the inside out into the world. Not in an abstract way. In a concrete way. What do you notice about your life when you're in that state of luminous stillness? What seems important? What seems trivial? Use those insights as a compass for everyday decisions. Because the spiritual traditions of the world are unanimous on one point. Wisdom that comes from within is more reliable than wisdom that comes from without. Paul wrote in the letter to the Ephesians, "Be filled with the Spirit." The Greek word used there is plerou, to be completely filled, to have no empty space. The fullness Paul describes isn't a permanent state for most people. It's a direction, a north star, and every time you sit in silence and perceive the light, you're taking a step in that direction. The fifth step is community. Contemplative knowledge has always been easier to develop in the company of others who are on the same path. Not because you need validation, but because the language of these experiences is so different from everyday language that having people to talk to about it, people who understand what you're describing, is itself a form of deepening. Every day we receive messages from people who have found comfort, hope, and strength through this channel. And that is only possible because there is a community that believes in this mission. If you feel this content has made a difference in your life and you'd like to help us keep bringing this message to more people, I've left a support link in the first pinned comment. Your contribution helps us keep this work going and reach even more families, homes, and hearts. If you decide to support us, know that your help is part of this mission. Thank you for walking this path with us. And this channel is exactly that space. A place where the language of inner experience is taken seriously. Where the questions you've been carrying without being able to ask them find other people who've been carrying those same questions. Where what you see when you close your eyes isn't reduced to neurology or inflated into vague mysticism, but treated with the seriousness and reverence it deserves. You've made it here. We've traveled through 2,000 years of history. Through the neuroscience of Harvard, Stanford, and Lausanne. Through the teachings of Jesus, the medieval Christian mystics, the texts of Tibetan Buddhism and Sufi wisdom. Through the story of how this knowledge was suppressed and why that matters. And we've arrived at something simple, You have access right now to a dimension of your own consciousness that can transform the way you live every single day. The light you see when you close your eyes is not noise. It's signal. It's your soul saying that it's present, that it's waiting, that it's ready to show you something no open eye could ever see. Thousands of people have already accessed the digital book and said they never looked at this subject the same way again. The link is in the first pinned comment. You decide if you want to be part of that group. You made it to the end, and that already sets you apart. Most people who started this video left in the first few minutes because they prefer the surface. You stayed. You sat with the depth. And that says something about you that no diploma or certificate ever could. If this video opened something inside you, if it made a connection you weren't expecting to find today, go ahead and hit like right now. Not for the channel, for the conversation we had here, for what you're taking with you. The like is your way of saying it was worth it, and it makes an enormous difference in helping more people find this content. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell, because what's coming is directly connected to what we opened today, and you don't want to walk into the middle of a conversation that started here. And everyone who made it to the end, drop the phrase "I came from the ligged" in the comments right now. That's it. I want to see the ones who stayed until the very end. I will read every single comment. I came from the lig. Drop it in the comments right now. And check out the video that's coming up on your screen. It's the natural next step from everything we explored here today. Don't skip it. Go straight there. Because the journey that started here isn't over yet.